Okay, I think it's stabilized a little bit. We won't wait any longer. We'll kick off this morning's PES Network Mutual Learning webinar. This morning on the topic of improving outreach to groups further from the labour market. Obviously a highly important topic, and we're really lucky today that we're going to hear from three different inspiring examples from across Europe about different approaches that have been taken by PES and their partner organisations to do this. My name's Ed Thorpe. I'll be moderating this morning's webinar, supported as ever by Eamon Davin, our PES expert, who I'm sure that many of you will know from other events. We have about an hour and a half ahead of us until 11:30. We're going to have three different inspiring presentations. We're going to have different perspectives as well, which is really interesting. We're going to have a presentation from a PES, one from a city and one from a public agency. And we're also going to be looking at different target groups. So we're going to have a presentation about approaches looking at migrant integration, approaches targeting young people, and approaches aimed at women, a particular target group. So hopefully you'll be really inspired by these practices. We encourage you to ask questions. There's going to be quite a lot of time at the end to have a real Q&A. So please do ask your questions. The way we do that in this webinar is, unfortunately, only our panelists here today are able to actually speak. So please ask your questions in the Q&A box. You should see the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Don't use the chat. You can use the chat to say hello to each other, as I'm sure people are sort of starting to do already. They usually do. There you go. So people are starting to say hello in the chat. But if you have a question, please put it, it's just next to the chat function at the bottom. Please also, when you put a question, make it clear who your question is to, because it might be, you might think it's obvious at the time because somebody's speaking, but when we come to the, after the three presentations have happened and we start looking at the questions, it might not be obvious who it's to. So you can ask a question to everyone, or you can ask a question to one of our panelists, but please make that clear in the Q&A box, and if possible, let us know who you are as well. That's always great. People always want to know, so I'll make it clear right from the beginning that this is recorded, and the recording will be made available to all participants. You'll receive that by email a few days after the event. So, don't worry too much about sort of writing down everything you hear. You'll have an opportunity to go back and listen to anything that you found inspiring in today's webinar. I think that's most of the practical information. Just also to say on the Q&A, you can upvote other people's questions. So if you see a question that you wanted to ask, you don't need to ask it again. Just please upvote that question, and it will help Eamon to pick it up when we come to the Q&A. Okay, before we start and we hand over to our three presenters, and thank you already to our panelists who have joined us here. I'll introduce you all shortly. We're going to have a few introductory words. Eamon will give us a bit of a thematic introduction in a second, but before that, I'd like to hand the floor over to Elodie Fazi, who is the team leader of the PES Network Secretariat in DG Employment. Elodie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning. Good morning to all. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar, which is our first PES Network webinar this year, actually. So for those of you who might be less familiar with the PES Network, it was created in 2014, and it brings together PES from the 27 EU member states, but also Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. And our network, basically, we aim to really strengthen the cooperation between the PES so that they can learn from each other, but also really act together in facing new or common challenges. And I think we can really say that the topic we're touching upon today, outreach, obviously is not new, but it's been really a growing concern for many public employment services across Europe. First, because the mandate of PES is in many cases not anymore limited to supporting people who are already registered as unemployed. On the one hand, PES are really increasingly supporting those that might be at risk of losing their job, and it's very clear in the green and digital transition. But on the other hand, really PES are increasingly supporting those who are not actively looking for a job, who can be further from the labor market and considered, so to say, economically inactive. And obviously, this is becoming even more important in a context where we have a quite tight labor market with growing labor and skills shortages. So not surprisingly, the issue has been really at the heart of our network in recent years, and we touched upon it in many different contexts. For example, in our recent activities on supporting people displaced from Ukraine, or vulnerable customers, for example, or persons with disabilities. Also, we've done quite some work on monitoring of the Youth Guarantee, where clearly outreach is a key question. So outreach is also linked to a number of initiatives that are well known at EU level, like the Youth Guarantee. And there's also many opportunities which are given by EU funds, in particular the European Social Fund Plus, to support your activities on outreach. But it's really typically a task that requires thinking outside of the box and taking PES action, I would say, outside of their formal context, providing a broader set of support that goes much beyond job search. So it's clearly a task that public employment services cannot do on their own. It implies working with partners, NGOs, social services, municipalities. And that's why we're having this webinar today. And that's why we're extremely pleased to have such a broad range of partners today. We see we have NGOs, social partners, region, municipalities, but also a representative from academia. So that's, I think, a good place to have this dialogue among ourselves. So I will not go into the aim of the webinar because Ed just mentioned it. So we'll be really looking at good practices, but we will also try to take some time after that to engage and have a dialogue on lessons learned and how to improve support, and to open up a bit the debate in the last part of the webinar. Obviously, this webinar is one of the many activities we have with the PES Network, which is a very active community. We have about 20 activities every year. And I would really like to invite you, if you want to find out more, please have a look at the Knowledge Center and the repository of practices, because there you can really find a lot of practices, hopefully inspiring, which has very much linked to the discussion today, including, for example, the latest toolkit on persons with disabilities, or practices on vulnerable customers, for example. Please also register to our newsletter and try to stay in touch. And I guess there will be many more opportunities to do this. So I can only close by wishing you an inspiring webinar, fruitful and active discussion. And I would like to hand over to Ed for the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elodie. After the presentations, it will be Eamon, our PES expert, who will be leading us through the Q&A session. So Eamon, before we hear from our three different presenters, could you just give us a few words also of introduction to today's topic?
Thank you very much, Ed, and good morning, everybody. I'd just like to briefly supplement Elodie's very kind of useful scene setting. Outreach is a term that's often used, but as with many of these subjects, there's not always a very clear definition of what we mean by it. I had a look through the literature, and there's no one standard definition of outreach. But one very good definition I came across was one from a good study called Effective Outreach to Needs, Experience from the Ground, organised by the European Commission in the context of the Youth Guarantee back in 2018. And this study described outreach as activity to inform hard to reach people who may be facing multiple barriers about support available for their labour market integration. So I think a key feature of outreach is essentially taking labour market interventions out of their standard setting. As Elodie very helpfully and I think well explained, this is becoming increasingly important, I think for quite a few reasons actually. I'd just like to briefly kind of pose some of those for you. A tight labour market, as we have at the moment, with continuing skill and labour shortages, does, as Elodie said, require PES to engage with people beyond the traditional client base of the insured unemployed. There's an increasing awareness that successful services to all PES customers do need to be customer focused. I think a customer focus really essentially means engaging with people in the ways that they would prefer to be engaged with, rather than expecting them to fit into what we expect them to do as delivery agents. Certain groups of people who are, in a sense, off the government and indeed the public employment service radar won't always respond well to conducting their business in a traditional government office environment. So they're unlikely to work well with PES and indeed other support organisations unless we literally reach out to them, hence outreach. We also hear increasingly about the PES ecosystem, lots of organisations coming together. And this means we really do need to create more options for people to connect with support services. So the role of partnerships is crucial in connecting clients, particularly those furthest from labour market integration, to support. And so outreach is becoming a more important feature of our service delivery model. Many of the targets of our outreach activity, those farthest from the labour market, have a variety of needs. And so a traditional binary approach, classifying somebody simply by gender, age, or length of unemployment is probably too broad brush. So taking an example of young NEETs, young people not in education, employment or training, they may have a wide variety of barriers to employability. So what we call an intersection approach is needed, thinking about them very much as individuals. Our webinar this morning, as Ed mentioned, will present some really excellent examples. And they've been purposefully chosen to cover 3 of the main target groups who we really do need to activate in much larger numbers to achieve the objectives of the twin transitions that Elodie mentioned by the end of the decade. 3 groups mentioned particularly in all of the studies, thinking about the policy work that we need to be implementing, are migrants, young people not in education, employment and training, and particularly women. So on that basis, we have 3 very good examples, which will hopefully give very good practical insights into why outreach is so important and give you kind of inspiration and generate some interesting questions where you can probe our speakers in more detail about what it is that has made their particular practices particularly successful. So enjoy the event, and I'd like to hand back to Ed to introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Eamon. It's a really useful overview of the topics we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, we'll move on to our first presentation. As I said, we have different combinations of stakeholder and target group. So the first one is an example from Portugal. It's the public agency, it's the High Commission for Migration, and we're delighted to be joined by Paula Ferreira from the High Commission for Migration, who will be talking about their approach to working with migrants through a one-stop shop type approach, specifically local migrant integration support centres. Just to let people know as well that we're also joined on the panel by Luísa Bastos from the Portuguese PES. So Paula will be giving the presentation, but if people have questions that they would like to ask also of the PES, please in the Q&A, you can ask questions to both or either of Paula from the High Commission or from Luísa of the PES. So that said, please for the next 10 minutes, Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paula Ferreira. I represent the High Commission of Migration. I appreciate the invitation to be here and present the Portugal strategy with migrants. The next slide, please. Thank you. The High Commission is a public institute collaborating the definition and implementation. The principal mission is installed in the 1996, and the integration of migrant and diversity among cultures, ethnicals, communities, and relations. Also, the Commission of Migration takes on the new and important challenges with the National Implementation Plan, Global Pact Migration. This plan advocates a holistic approach to the migration and therefore involves some levels of public administration, as well as civil society. We take 70 measures in this national plan, but these measures are designed to respond to the 5 stands of action. The first, promoting safe, orderly, and regular migration. The second, improving the process of organizing migratory flows and integrated border management. promoting the reception and integration of the immigrants, ensuring that they are the regular situation, supporting the liking of the migrants to their country of origin and their return projects. And the last one, increasing the partnerships for development with countries, the origin and transit. Please, the next slide, thank you. Created the National Migrant, the National Migrant Integration Support Centers are created in the 204 in order to give the response to some difficulties felt by the migrants in their process of integration in Portugal. The cultural difference, organizational or legislative, together with the quality of the different service to each the immigrant must apply. Talk the High Commission of Migration to create a place together in the same place, different service, institutions and cabinets of support to the immigrants. A place talks specialty to the immigrants. These centers are located across country, different territories like Porto, Lisboa, Beja, Faro. Is the 4 different located. Can you take the next slide, please? Thank you. This service are the local service provided. It's many citizen space, miniature registration, documentation, social support, employment. It's a very service to combine the central this one-stop shop. Okay, and the same logic. The next, if you can see this, the next slide, please. Okay. In this next logic, the same logic, okay, of having where the service are integrated, as also extended at the local level with the local migrant integration support center through partnerships with municipality or civil societies entities, which provide support to migrants and the first line of immigration. We have 155 local migrant integration support centers run by the municipalities and 12 specialized local migrant integration support centers with 8 municipalities. This next slide, please. So in these two different and not too different are strides, and where is the proximity with migrants by creating confidence, sharing of facilities and knowledge. Example of migrant entrepreneurs who want to bring the business to test it, and space for event such job fairs. Example, the intercultural mediators for the migrant communities, when they work with us, thought and agreement between the migrant associations and the High Commission of Migration. Also, partnership based on partnerships, like an exchange. Transversal and articulated approach, breaking down the barriers and block access to service. Also integrate management and reinforcement of the social cohesion. And other stage, social inclusion of more vulnerable socio-economic groups. Talk to working groups created by support, for example, find a job, and also empowering them to create their own business. Can you take the next slide, please? Thank you. In this slide, we can find they also a call center specialized in the migration and the telephone translation service available in the 69 language. Then you can use it to access the public service. They are also yes, they are also the app My Claim in the Migrant Forum, and the mobile center migration too. Can you take the next? Okay. They are also a network specialty dedicated to support the integration of immigrants into the labor market with a 21 nationwide, resulting for the cooperation between the High Commission of Migration and the Public Employment Service. It is, thank you. It's so, I just know I take my time.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Paola. That was great. No, you were bang on time. That was perfect.
I try.
That was really interesting. I mean, we always talk about the ecosystem of service providers in the world of PES and employment, and this is a really good example of partnership working to meet the needs of a particular group. So I'm sure there'll be questions for yourself and maybe for Luisha from the PES as well, but we'll take those questions later. A couple of people are asking again about the recording and the presentation. So just to remind, yes, the recording of this session will be sent by email to all participants, so you'll have a chance to go through the presentations again. But thank you already, Paola, if you stay with us, and then we'll come to the questions in a bit. So having heard about, so from a public agency in Portugal about services for migrants, we're now going to move to Belgium and hear from one of the PES in Belgium about services for young people, particularly young people not in employment, education or training, the NEETs as they're well known as. So we're joined by Jenne Gai from the International Relations Department of Actiris. And thank you, Jenne, for stepping in as well. I know that you, a colleague, was going to be making this presentation. So thanks very much for stepping in and replacing your colleague. But Jenne is going to be telling us to say about Actiris, which is the regional PES for Brussels. In Belgium, it's a country with not one national PES, but a few different regional PES. So from Brussels, talking about outreach services focused on young NEETs. So Jenne, for the next 10 minutes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed, for this very good introduction of our Belgian system. So yes, we at Actiris, we have a partnership measure for NEETs. And outreach, the topic of the webinar today, is one of the main goals of creating this measure. Of course, NEETs they're not in education, employment, or training. We know what it means. So it means they are not connected to any of those systems, disengaged from the services that we provide to our customers, that they are a bit lost in their pathway to work or back to school, and that they really need a specific approach to reconnect and find their way again. So those are the main goals of the partnership measure that we have established to reconnect with those young people and guide them all the way back into employment or into school or training. So we've started out before 2019, a couple of years testing this way of working in pilot projects, and it worked. So since 2019, we have a larger partnership with 9 organizations that are spread over the territory of Brussels, that each have their own background, missions, specificities, which allow them to cover this diversity of this group of young needs. I'm just going to call them young people because one of the studies that we have used in evaluating the current measure says that we really shouldn't be using that term. So young people, 9 partners. So we've selected them through a call for projects. And it's, of course, a very conscious decision of the PES to delegate these tasks of outreach and personal guidance of these young people to other organizations, not do it ourselves. It's logical, I guess, because as they are disconnected from us, from our services, it's probably not us who are the best placed to reconnect with them. Now, one thing that I'd like to share with you, because we noticed this when we were doing the pilot projects, and it stays the same way in the current larger project, is that being disengaged from our services, from the PES services, doesn't mean that we are working mainly with people who are not registered with us. Actually, we see that a majority of the people in this measure are registered with the PES. So it means that a lot of the young people that are registered with us are still not engaged in what we offer to them. Now, we see mainly 3 reasons for that. A first reason is really when PES service offer doesn't work as it should, when we have delays. So we aim to start up a personal guidance of every young person that registers themselves within 1 month, but we have delays. So when we have delays, we lose people. That's clear. A second reason is when our services don't meet the needs and the style as well, let's say, of young people. Here we have a translation problem of the way of being and the needs of young people with a quite, traditional bureaucratic institution. And then there's a third reason. We've noticed that a part of the young people who are registered don't know that they are registered because their parent did it or a social worker did it, or they know that they are registered sometimes, but they don't know what it means. They don't know what the consequences for their unemployment benefits and for their rights to have access to support to look for a job. And so our 9 partners, what they do mainly for us is they connect with those young people, they go find them. And so it's necessary to find them, to reach out even when they are registered with the PES. And then they are interpreters. They make sure that the young person and the PES understand each other. And sometimes that the PES can adapt to the young person and the young person learns to get to know the language, that's the administrative language and way of thinking of institutions. Now, what does a partner need and what does the young person need? It's actually quite similar. They both need confidence. The young person needs to build confidence in himself. Again, I'm saying him because there's a majority of young men in this measure. To build confidence in himself again, and we see that this works best when the partner can really activate everything that is necessary to create opportunities for this young person. So really put him and his needs, his desires, his tempo, rhythm at the center of the project. And therefore, the partner needs the confidence of the PES. We have to trust them that they will do their job good, that they know what to do. And so we give them this space to do that. What you see here actually is the 5 frames in blue are the main methodological principles of the tender that we used to select the partners. Now, so it's quite free. There's mainly 2 things that we've asked of the partners, is that they take the young person all the way from the start, so from outreaching and reconnecting through remobilizing, building confidence, all the way through personal guidance to develop their career path and get them back into school or a training or a job or a traineeship, and stay with there for a while to make sure it lasts. That's one thing we ask. The partner does everything from A to Z, stays a person of confidence for the young person. And the second thing we ask is that what they do leads to results. Either we've separated them in 2 parts of results. With a positive action, we mean that we see that the young person is taking steps to reconnecting to the systems. So opening an individual action plan with the PES, starting a language course, doing a mentorship or a volunteering activity. And the positive results are the classical things. So the young person has found a job, training, education. So you see that this measure has had very good results, and specifically considering the very difficult target group we're working with, this is a really wonderful achievement. Which brings me to the lessons learned. We really thank this success of the work of the partners to the liberty and the space, let's say, really the space that they got to develop and create a project, an individual project around each individual that they worked with. So every young person can take the time they need and do what they need to get back on their feet. And this was possible because the partners have been working with very low caseloads. They as well were able to propose their caseloads while they were applying for this project. And the final caseload has been a negotiation between the partner and the PES, and they are varying between 15 and 40 people in guidance per full-time equivalent counselor. And we see that it works, and we see as well that the partners have done everything they can to accompany as many youth as possible and to stay connected with them, even during the lockdown periods. The agility that they had was gigantic, and they never lost contact actually with the young people. So COVID didn't have a negative impact on the results of this measure. And to finish off, some challenges. I guess I'd like to focus on the 2 concerning outreach. One is an administrative one. What we do today is we finance outreach indirectly because we finance the counselor. The counselor has low caseload, so a lot of time to invest in outreach activities that may not lead to a guidance. You know, you do not know what the result of your outreach activities will be. So the question is, I mean, our challenge is, should we ever directly finance outreach, purely the outreach, and not the guidance following it? And how do we do that without creating an administrative burden? How do you prove outreach activities? A second relating to outreach is, so we have done a good job now reaching out to the young people registered but disengaged from the PES services. How can we get stronger in outreaching to those not registered with the PES? And then as an institution, questions are popping up as, is this our task? So that's a dilemma we have, and where we get into the cooperation, of course, with schools, preventing school dropout, which is, of course, the main issue. And where as well we need to look into not only the responsibility of PES, not only the responsibility of schools, but the larger socioeconomical situation where young people are growing up in, and that we see is becoming, unfortunately, more and more challenging. So the situation where young people in Brussels and maybe in more cities are starting their life in is becoming more precarious. There's more poverty, there's more small crime, and it becomes more difficult as well to find a stable job for those who actually do invest and get back on their feet. So important challenges remain, but this partnership measure for us, we are really glad that we have it, and glad that we can share the success of it today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenna. Yeah, an important final message. You might have been representing a PES there, but clearly a partnership measure. It's again another example of the importance of PES working together with their partners, particularly to reach particular target groups that might be hard to reach. I was also struck by a couple of things you said, thinking back to one of the workshops I was involved in at the recent PES Network Stakeholder Conference, where a couple of the recommendations about how to enhance partnership working were about piloting measures, doing them at small scale, finding out what works and upscaling it, and also tapping into ESF, European Social Funds, in order to do that. As I understood it, you've done both of those in your examples. That was an interesting, inspiring example for others. Do post your questions to Jenna in the Q&A box. I can see that starting to excuse me. I can see that starting to populate. And after our final presentation, as I say, Eamon will pick up on those questions. So if you have a question for Jenna on that example focused on young people, do post it in the Q&A. But now it's time for our final presentation. We're going now to hear from a city perspective. We're going to the city of Munich in the context of the Munich Employment and Qualification Programme, which is the city's principal labour market policy instrument, particularly focused at assisting labour market integration of the long-term unemployed. And within that programme, there is a specific part which is focused on supporting the return to work of women that either paused their career for different reasons, often to take care of somebody within the family. So we're delighted to be joined by Margaret Steinler, who is the project manager at the Department of Labour and Economic Development in the city of Munich, to tell us about this programme, this women's empowerment project called Power M. So Margaret, for the next 10 minutes, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for the great introduction, and hello from a rainy and cold morning in Munich. I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, good. All right. Good. Now, I'm trying to talk today about the program which Ed mentioned right now, Power M, which helps to support women to re-enter the labor market. And I'm not talking so much about the contents of our programs, which I'm glad to answer maybe later on, but more how we reach out to our target group. Let me quickly start with what we try to achieve in Munich. Gender equality is part of our employment and qualification program, and we try to support women to re-enter the labor market after taking a break for caring for children or relatives. What we also try to do is, somebody mentioned the labor shortages in the beginning. We try to identify hidden talents. Munich suffers severe labor shortages in certain areas, and there we also work directly with local employers, mostly small and medium-sized enterprises, to hire skilled labor and find suitable candidates among our participants, and also try to alert them to the needs of women who coming back after a family break, because most of them work part-time or they need a little more time to adapt again to the labor market. What we try to do, we reach out to participants and we support about 400 women each year. So far, we have over 6,000 women, which we helped and supported in re-entering the labor market. The project was financed by the German European Social Funds from 2009 till 2021. Unfortunately, the European Social Fund in Germany discontinued the programs for gender equality in the labor markets, but luckily in Munich, the city stepped in and now we are funded purely with municipal funding. Okay, how do we reach out? We heard a lot before about public employment service agencies. Our target group is about, I think 90% is not registered with a local agency for employment. The typical participant is a woman. She's about in her early 40s, early to mid 40s, and has 2 children. Most of our participants are well qualified, about 70% have a college degree, but all of them have a larger employment gap, about 6 to 7 or 8 years, which means that their confidence is pretty much low with regard to getting back into the labor market. Those women are great networkers. They do a lot of networking when it comes to childcare, to kindergarten, organizing anything with to do with their family, but they are mostly not good in networking for their professional needs or in order to re-enter the labor market. So what we try to do is to help them make that step through a variety of trainings and support measures. But the first challenge also for us is try to find that group and to motivate them to participate in our program. Therefore, we take a 2 steps or approach on 2 sides. First, we decided that we need to have build a local strong brand to motivate those women, those non-active persons. And the second step we do is to create a network with relevant stakeholders in Munich and the region. Now, building a brand, most of you probably heard about how to do that, but I want to take you through a few steps about what we have done in Munich. First, I think it's important to have a catchy and easy name. Power M in the times of energy crisis, we might get 1 or 2 calls about providing energy, but Power M actually stands for profiling and orientation for re-entry in Munich. We then went on to create a strong corporate identity, corporate design, design material from flyers to posters, and also went into advertising, for example, in the Munich subway and in trains, just to create some kind of recognition for our materials. We use, of course, various information tools. We have a website, we have Instagram, we use social networks, we have a newsletter reaching out to about 6,000 people, trying to inform about our program and new offers. I think one of the important thing is that reaching out to a target group which is non-active and not registered with PES services, to have also a low threshold to enter the program. We do low-key information events, inviting the target groups. We go out to, for example, childcare center, present ourselves, and use as little formality as possible in order to give an easy access to the program. One key story is testimonial and success stories, which we promote at events and which we promote on our website and even in advertising. Testimonials are our alumni, and we have also alumni network for which we do events. We invite them to come to workshops to do some little refresh classes. And we know from our controlling that about 50% of our participants come through referrals. Here you see one woman, and I do a quick, let's see if I can go to our website, the PowerM website. There you see some of our testimonials online who talk about their way back into the job. And it's, as you see, it's not stage pictures. These are real women trying to.
We can't see the website, Margaret.
You can't see the website. Okay.
Still see the presentation. Yeah.
You still see the presentation. Then I probably have to give you that. Okay. Then I do that maybe later and continue with my presentation. Okay. So we know through all these measures, which are, I think, classical marketing and outreach activities, we reach about 80% of our participants. The other point, which I mentioned before, is that we engage into a lot of networking with relevant stakeholders, which means, of course, the first step is identify and approach the relevant stakeholders. Our local agency for employment, even though there are not a lot of our participants registered, we do joint events, tap into their resources. For example, as you see, in about 3 weeks, we have a Aktionsforum. I think the name is self-explanatory, for re-entrance, where we have a program with a whole variety of other projects and ourselves, where women can get information about all the different services in Munich. We go to childcare centers. We work with associations for employers, and of course, target multiple NGOs in Munich who work with families and mothers. So we have, according to our controlling, we know that about 20% of our participants are reached through referrals and networking with other stakeholders in Munich. Now, as we heard before, measuring project success is also very important for us. We ask all participants when they come to their first support and information event, how they heard about PowerM, so we know approximately which channels work and not, and we can do some readjustment. And of course, we also measure the project success, which I want to share with you. After 12 months, we know that about 2/3 of our participants returned into the labor market. Most of them go into an employment situation. About 15% start their own business, and about 20% pursue another further education program. We know which industries they go, most of them into the professional and business services industries, health and social services, and education. And what we find most important is that about 77% consider their re-entry as adequate to their qualifications. Because I think one of the main goals in women empowerment programs is those women had a professional background. So if they want to work, they find some jobs. But if they don't go through a program which helps them to develop self-confidence, most of them end up doing minimal work jobs with minimal wages. And that's what we try to avoid. We try to get them back into a professional job, well-paid, more hours, and help them to secure their professional career and also secure their financial independence. So these are our measures. I think summing up, what is really important for us in targeting our group in being successful in outreach is to have a low threshold for entering the programs, being accessible, being outside from institutions, which I think is also something I share with the program in Belgium, working with partners, And I also like the expression freedom of methodologies, not providing a strict program, but being very flexible and reacting to the needs of our participants. Okay, thank you very much. And I try to give you another glimpse at our women, because I think it's always nice to see all these profiles. Now, quick stop. You see here we have many testimonials. This is a woman from Greece, all kind of backgrounds. And exactly here we have women from Peru. So it's multicultural, multinational, and I think quite successful. So thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Margaret. That was great. Really interesting to see an example which stresses so much the importance of branding and marketing as part of that approach to outreach. And also, I think the key messages around, finding jobs that really match the skills and qualifications of people. That has to be the real aim. It's not just about getting into any old job, and particularly jobs that are insufficient for the the competencies and the capacities of the people that we're trying to target. So thank you for that again, Margaret. Now we're going to hand over to the Q&A. We have about half an hour ahead of us, so hopefully time to really dig into quite a few of the issues that we've heard about in from our three presentations. And thank you again to our presenters. Just a reminder that we'll be picking up the questions that have been posted in the Q&A box. So if you've posted it in the chat, I know that colleagues have been reminding not to post in the chat, but to post the questions in the Q&A. That's where Eamon will be taking them from. Also, unfortunately, no one apart from the panelists is able to take the floor. So if anybody has raised their hand to take the floor, unfortunately, we can't offer you that possibility today, but you can still, there's still time to post your question in the Q&A box, which you should see at the bottom of the screen. And as Eamon's managing those questions, you can still keep posting new ones, and Eamon will do his best to manage those. Lots of issues, Eamon, I see to pick up on, including a question directed at yourself.
Indeed.
So best of luck to you. I'll hand over to you now, Eamon, for the next half hour to go through these questions.
Thank you very much, Ed. I think, again, the question addressed to me, very, very helpful in setting the context. Monica Chabra has asked why in my introduction I specifically referred to young people, NEETs, migrants or women, but didn't actually make a specific reference to disability. Of course, the labour market integration of disabled people is absolutely essential and a top, very high priority. And the point I was making was that actually, of course, amongst the population of young people and NEETs, amongst the population of migrants, and of course amongst women, there are also disabled people. And the whole point, I think, of outreach is attempting to offer services that are, as far as possible, very, very much orientated towards the individual specific needs of people on a personal basis. And so even though overall a lot of the main policy activity towards achieving twin transitions talks about activating many more women, many more young people and many more migrants, that of course does not exclude or preclude work to support disabled people, but they may well be in those three categories. So hopefully that has partly clarified the context for my introduction. And thank you, Monica, for a very, very good question. I'd like to start with a question from our colleague Hildy Olsen from the PES Secretariat at the Commission. This is addressed to our colleagues from Portugal. What Hildy has asked is, this is a very, very long-lasting cooperation in Portugal, this work with migrants. Could either of our presenters perhaps share any information with us about the impacts on access to work and what the particular challenges are? So what has the impact of your programs been on people being able to access employment? And are there any particular challenges in ensuring that the outreach does actually result in people finding employment? So perhaps would Paula or Louisa like to pick up on that for us? Thank you. Paula, yeah? Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Louisa is the answer this question is my employment center. I don't know, Louisa, if you can.
Yeah, perhaps Louisa, have you got any information on how well the outreach does result in people finding work particularly?
No.
Yes, I don't have data from the centers because it is not in the PES, but we have a lot, and it's a long experience, and it doesn't started with all the service at the same time. The service provided in the centers grow with time, and more entities will join. But regarding the employability of migrants, we have a lot of pressure at the moment, and we are changing some of our internal rules about the access to the employment service and to full registration as an unemployed person, and for access our active labor markets and training. And PES is one of the main providers of the Portuguese language courses for migrants in Portugal. So it is one of the starting points for the migrants to learn the language, the Portuguese language. So we work very closely with the High Commission for Migration in that aspect, and we refer migrants to each other. Also out of the centers if necessary. So I think the main challenge is for people to know us, and but there are information spreads out, and we refer the several institutes and ministries refer the persons to each other, and specifically to the CNAIM. If some migrant came to PES and we don't know how to help him, we will refer him to go to the CNAIM, to the National Migrants Center. But we are one of the main or the first doors that they have because of the needs to the language courses, and even the employers refer them and ask us to give some language courses after hours and this is a way also for them to start entering and to know the service that are available and to ask for help if they need.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. So you are actually receiving inquiries from employers, which I think is a good indicator that clearly you are actually linking people with jobs, and employers obviously like you to do some kind of post-employment kind of ongoing work to ensure people can take advantage of the opportunities. That's extremely helpful. Thank you very much. Jenna, I have a question for you concerning the outreach in the Brussels City region from Cynthia Harrison. And what she's asking is really, is there a particular profile of the staff who do the initial engagement with the young NEETs? Are they people with specific career guidance, counselling, experience and training, or are they people who have particular profiles perhaps aimed at the engagement or the interpersonal kind of link in the client group? Or how do you decide what the skills are for the people who do this kind of contact, or how is that decided perhaps by the organisations who are in first contact with the young NEETs?
Is indeed one of the selection criteria. So an organisation that wants to introduce a project needs to describe either the qualifications of the personnel they already have, or the profile that they are looking to hire. And as we are here in a very open methodological framework, we really rely on the expertise of the partner, and so his capacity to explain to us why this profile is best fit for their project. Now, there is an evaluation ongoing, so it's not yet validated, the evaluation, but there is signs that there is specific attitudes of people working with the needs that are very important. So maybe there will be more indicative criteria in the next call for projects. But it's what we see is that really the qualifications of the person and the stability of the entire team is important. Those two things.
Thank you very much, and very interesting. So I think you've given a nice elaboration there of how this kind of fluid open methodology means perhaps that people with quite a variety of skills and profiles could be best at engaging with individual needs in certain circumstances. And maybe from more evaluation, we'll learn even more about exactly what the kind of magic bullets are to ensure you can engage very well with young people. Thank you very much. Margaret, an interesting question concerning the PowerM program in Munich. Again, a question from Cynthia, who's asked, as we need to think more and more about gender balance, could you tell us, does PowerM engage with men as well as women on occasions? And is this something you think may become an increasing feature of your work over time for any reason? Thank you.
Yes, actually, we provide, or we offer our services gender neutral. I mean, the main criteria is that the participant takes care of children or family members and has been out of the labor market. And occasionally we find 1 or 2 men who are doing that. I just read a very interesting statistics that most women do a break during their work life for care work, men do it for education. And we integrate them into the program, but quite honestly, sometimes they have a different approach to that. So it sometimes doesn't help the dynamics in the group so much. But we are still open to all kind of person. We hope that we see more men, and we maybe then target that freedom of methodology. We always do a tailor-made support program for each participant. We have to readjust and maybe do some other, put in some other elements into that.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So some interesting observations about perhaps the group dynamics of the gender mix of a program, and also some gender disparities between the reasons that men and women may be not active actors in the labour market. Thank you very much indeed. Jana, we've touched on the idea of the intersectional approach and the fact that NEETs may of course be from many different backgrounds. Do you have any information about the number of NEETs you engage with in the Brussels City region who are actually from migrant backgrounds themselves? Do you have any data or perhaps some anecdotal information about that particular group?
Yes, now from migrant background, most of the young people in Brussels have a migrant background through their parents or grandparents. And unfortunately, these second, third generation migrants are more represented in the school dropout group. But we also see that the measure reaches as well what we call newcomers, so first generation young migrants. There's about, if we look at the education obtained abroad, so the diploma they got from abroad, we see that it's about 20 to 25% of the young people in the measure. And this could, that there are so many young people with a migrant background could maybe explain as well that we see that one of the main complaints or reasons for disconnection with the system is the feeling of being discriminated, of not being part of society, or society not being there for them. So maybe there is a correlation between those.
Thank you very much. And Jana, perhaps could I ask you one just further question for the moment? You touched on some of the issues about the administration and the kind of funding, and I suppose that always links into targets of the kind of outreach programs. Do you have any particular information about any of the kind of targets that are set for the kind of volumes of or success rates for contact with NEETs from any of the kind of partners who the programs are involved with? Do you have any information about that?
Okay, so for the success rates, that's the easiest one. It's a global goal to be obtained of 80% of the trajectories leading to either a positive action, so getting closer to the labor market, or to a positive result, so employment, education, or training. In terms of number of youth followed per partner or per counselor, that is negotiated during the selection procedure. So some partners have a very, very intensive follow-up and work with the young people furthest away from the labor market. So they have they do it with smaller caseloads than certain other partners. I guess what I've seen from the evaluation is that we are talking about 2,000 to 3,000 euro of investment per year or per person. It depends on the way you look at it and the way you calculate the cost.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you've helpfully kind of addressed another question. Actually, somebody was raising the point of how do we try and ensure that there isn't creaming or skimming. So I suppose people who decide not to engage with some of the most kind of challenging clients, and you've mentioned then that low caseloads can support with a fluid methodology, very personalized support, perhaps ensuring you engage with some of the people with the multiple barriers. So thank you very much, Jana.
I guess maybe to add on that, we as a PES, we control this well when we are selecting the partners. We select and make sure that they really know how to reach out to the furthest away, and that this is the intrinsic motivation and reason of existence of the partner.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Margaret, a question from Katrine, who's asked actually, could you give us a view as to how long on average women are involved in the Power M program? And is there any kind of aftercare post-employment support, or is that covered by the alumni network, which you very helpfully described for us? So how long are women normally involved in the program, and what, if any, kind of after-employment, aftercare support can be offered? Thank you very much.
We have a set maximum time of 6 months for participation in the Power M program, where participants can take part in workshops and get individual coaching and other services, IT classes. After those 6 months, we have another called prolonged support phase of 6 months. And during that time, our coaches help, for example, with the application process or answer some question, do a quick CV check or things like that. After 12 months, we usually don't offer any larger scale support anymore, but of course, through the alumni network, we are still in touch and occasionally can give some help. And one of our partners offers a refresh class where we say after 1 or 2 years, we invite some women who haven't been successful in re-entering the labor market and offering them a quick refresher. Sometimes it just needs a little bit more orientation or some CV check.
Okay, so there is follow-up for people who perhaps don't succeed straight away. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. A question for Paula, actually, one of our Portuguese colleagues. Paula, could you give us a little bit more background as to how long it was between the first initial kind of development of the partnership and the very, very kind of comprehensive network that you now have? So what was the process? Did it start with the PES engaging perhaps with just 1 or 2 organizations? And how long did it take for this very impressive infrastructure to emerge, where you now cover so many different aspects of migrant support needs? And secondly, would you know, in broad terms, how many migrants are using these services, perhaps per month or per year overall? So I don't know if Paul actually or Louise would be best to kind of address that, but so the process for building the network and the volume of service users. Thank you.
Okay.
Paula, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We have the entities have been joined with the phased manner, increasing the service process for a better service. Some services are provided by the High Commission of Migration. The technicals are the technicals of the different institutions that work in the same space, basically. Where the first and important thing we have to translate, when we work with immigrants for the different countries, we have to have the translation service to facilitate to understand their needs. It's more important. Why? Because we created the confidence with the nurse service. On the way, the very demands of the present moment, the demography, economic, social levels impose an intercultural strategy based in policies that allow maximize the resource available. And we also respond to this question when create confidence in the migrants and articulations of the many centers. They're the centers of the migrants, the local, or the center, the migrants national.
Okay, thank you very much. And perhaps briefly, Louisa, would you have any information roughly about how many migrants are being dealt with normally through the kind of system, or how many people the Employment Service refer for help from migrant groups in a month or a year?
No, I don't have that data.
No problem.
What I can say is that at the moment, as we are facing some deficits, as most of the European countries have lack of workers. The main public that PES are dealing with at the moment is migrants, and the number of new enrollments in PES, in new registrations, almost 80 or 90% are, depending on the regions, but are from migrants at the moment. Okay. So it is our main concern, and group at the moment are migrants.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. In the presentation from our Portuguese colleagues, there was a reference, I think, to civil society organisations and getting the kind of insight of people representing the service users. Anton Exley has asked a question, interestingly, about the use of customer insight to really identify how attractive, or how perhaps how more attractive we could make our outreach work to target groups. Could I perhaps ask Jenna and then Margaret, have you done any specific work to identify customer perspectives on your outreach activities and what they find useful, what they'd like to improve? So Jenna, any examples from Actaris on the customer perspective on outreach to young people?
To say I'm not not the best person to reply to this, because it could be that young people have been participating in the evaluation of the current measure, but I'm not sure.
Okay,
sorry.
Fine. Thank you. Perhaps Margaret, have you done any kind of a specific, customer research into the way they perceive your outreach and how people responded to the very interesting branding and marketing work that you described for us?
We haven't done a survey on how they find our brand and how they judge that. We know when they enter the program, they have to sign up, and during that conversation, we always ask, how did you hear about PowerM? So that gives us some feedback, what's the most effective channel, and we know that referrals are very important. Also, we do a survey how to get feedback and an evaluation on our different offers, because we have IT classes, we have some competency workshops and the CV. So we get some feeling what they get a lot of acceptance. We all know that people don't like to hear about their pension gap, so that's not that popular, but we find it quite helpful. So we do occasionally evaluation and try to improve and get some different perspectives in.
Thank you, Margaret. You touched on a subject there, which is also raised by one of our kind of participants this morning. Could you tell us a little bit more about how important the digital aspect of training is for your kind of labour market returners? Does it feature very significantly, or perhaps not quite so much in terms of the requirements of your participants?
And that's actually where we get a lot of feedback that our participants find all these IT classes very, very helpful in digital skills. And I think it's also one aspect if somebody has been very distant from the labor market. I think one of the barriers is really to adapt to the new office digital environment. Even as we always call them, they are the smartphone users. They are very good with their smartphones, but they're not really very good with laptops and computers anymore. So in the beginning of Power M, we had a lot of participants who haven't used any kind of computers at all, but that's past. But now we have a lot of people who are very good in using digital technologies privately, but not for professional reasons. So we also have to always adapt our courses and our classes to the newest digital development, video conferencing being very popular right now. So of course, there's always an adaptation, and I think digital skills help people to get confidence to enter the modern workplace.
Thank you. And perhaps, Margaret, one more question for you for this stage. The whole issue of funding outreach activity and indeed employment programs for people further from the labour market can often be quite politically challenging, I think, in terms of accounting for the resource. We got a question from Dorit, who's actually asked for your program particularly. Is it funded on a per capita basis in terms of the number of people participating by the city, or is there a fixed volume for the program overall? So a very specific question about the financing mechanism for Power M.
Very important question.
Indeed, yeah.
We don't do funding per participants because that I think changes the quality, because then you're only trying to get people in, but not so much result based. We are focused with each of the partners has a certain amount of funding, and then we do afterwards an assessment. Of course, did they reach the agreed participants? Did they achieve the goal of labor market integration? So these are the measures where we do afterwards look at them closely, and sometimes you have to do an adjustment. And I think it's also important for funding projects, now I'm talking for the city of Munich, that you allow for PR and marketing funding. For example, when we applied for the European Social Funds, we always had half a person financed by the ESF for outreach and marketing. And in order to get all these measures done, somebody has to do it. It doesn't fall from the sky. And when we then now the city funded the program with 6 partners, we gave one partner extra budget to do marketing and outreach. So I think you always have to do some individual funding approach, and I'm not a big fan of per participant.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jenna, you mentioned, I think very helpfully for us, there is a great variety of approaches adopted by partners or external providers who engage with actuaries in your work. Have you picked up any particular kind of trends from the approach of the providers which appear to be particularly successful, looking at certain categories of needs or needs in certain situations? And do you do any work to evaluate success rates from different types of approaches at all in your evaluations, or is that something you might be thinking about at a later stage?
That would be very interesting to do. Unfortunately, very resource consuming.
Indeed. It sounds like a difficult task, evaluation-wise. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it would be useful, but we don't have those resources at the moment. We broadly speaking, all of the 9 partners reach good results. And have reached more people than they themselves had proposed. What we see is there's some partners who do a really very intense follow-up, and that have that propose activities that are not related to employment, but take the young people to the woods for a journey, or doing artistic projects. And those are experiences that seem to be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, there was a very interesting event on integrating young people in Brussels, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. And some of the most kind of creative practices appear to have very good results, which were quite sort of out of the box, I think, as you mentioned at the start. One very brief question I had, Jana, emerging from when you were presenting, actually, do the partners, do you think, liaise much with each other and learn much from each other in terms of approaches and success, as well as you being the catalyst for this approach?
Mm-hmm. It is something that we wanted to create in this partnership measure. We usually, so Actiris is used to working with partners for many different target groups. And usually there's a competition between those partners. And here we wanted to avoid the competition and to make sure that they can act complementary, and as well that with the other internal services of Actiris, or services offered by other types of partners, we wanted to make sure that there is a network that builds. And so the young person who is followed up by one neat partner can have access to other services when this is useful for him. We have managed to start to create this network, but in a future measure, we will like to reinforce this much more.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very dynamic network, which sounds like a really progressive development, actually. Thank you very much.
Eamon, just about to jump in on time. There's just
exactly,
we have about 7 minutes left, so maybe time for just one last round of questions, or a final question to the panelists. There is a possibility. I mean, if the panelists look at the Q&A, there might be some questions that you can quickly type an answer to. So if it's possible to do that, then some of the questions might be quite a quick typed answer might be possible. Otherwise, if you have some final questions, Eamon, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I had one final question for everybody, actually. Perhaps in turn you could just give us no more than a 1-minute answer, actually. But perhaps first of all, for Margaret, if you were looking at establishing Power M now, and it's been very successful, but with the benefit of hindsight, is there one thing you might do differently? So if a kind of colleagues around the world in the webinar were looking at doing this, is there one thing you think perhaps you do differently if you had the time again? There may not be, but
that's a difficult question. I would early on try to get additional funding. We created quite a big machine dependent on European social fund funding, and when that got away or didn't continue, it created 2 years of uncertainty, and we realized if your project partners are not uncertain about their future, they're not really working effectively. And we really saw some kind of decrease in outreach activities, also, of course, due to the pandemic. And it's very important to find alternatives early on.
Thank you. Very good answers to a difficult question. And apologies for putting you on the spot first there, actually. Perhaps Louisa or Paula, just one of you, actually, just again, perhaps in a couple of sentences, is there one thing you do differently? I mean, you've built a very impressive network, but if you were starting from scratch or advising colleagues, is there one thing you'd say this is something you perhaps might want to think about to set up a network for migrant support? Any one thing that perhaps you didn't think of before?
I don't know if Paula wants to say something, but for me is don't think this is like this from the beginning. It's it takes a lot of time so you have to do one step at a time, and invite one partner at a time, and then you will grow, and other partners will like to join. At the moment, in the local centers that are smaller, it is the municipalities that facing problems with the migrant integration that want to be part of the network. So at the beginning, probably we have to convince them to be a part of the network.
Okay.
So
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so putting lots of efforts into convincing people at the start to join. Thank you very much. And Jana, perhaps a final word from you, really, just one thing you might do differently if you were starting your very successful program today, or for colleagues, one thing that perhaps you think they should really think about doing that you couldn't have learned without hindsight. Hindsight's always 20/20 vision, of course. So.
Maybe another colleague has immediate inspiration and wants to take the floor.
That's fine. Well, perhaps we've covered everything, so it's not a problem. But yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. And perhaps I'll now hand back to Ed. We've only got a couple of minutes left before some final conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Eamon, for a really interesting Q&A session. And thanks again to the panelists for not only your presentations, but for answering all those questions so well. It's a really interesting conversation. I saw lots of positive feedback in the chat, which is really good to see. People, I mean, it's one of the strengths of the network that we can share these practical examples rather than just have theoretical conversations about how to resolve some of the challenges people are facing. But we also want to launch a quick poll, if we can, if colleagues can launch that, just to get feedback on the event. The network continually tries to improve the offer, not only to the members but to the wider ecosystem that I mentioned earlier. So all stakeholders, please take a moment to just it's just a very quick short poll, so that we can keep improving these events to better meet your needs in the future. Otherwise, before I wrap up officially today's webinar, I'll hand the floor back to Eamon just for any observations or conclusions you want to draw from the conversation, Eamon.
Yeah, thanks. So just perhaps for a minute or maybe two maximum, really. I think the examples are really well chosen, and I think all of our presenters have shown some very innovative approaches to engaging with inactive women, NEETs and migrants. I think one thing that came across very strongly for me was that outreach really needs to draw upon good partnership working and networking in order to really deliver successful integration services. I think outreach, if successful, can clearly raise the profile of the mainstream PES as well, and that can help to inform further potential customers of the support available for them. So I think, as all of our presenters identified, success breeds success when it comes to outreach. I think meeting clients away from mainstream or traditional settings has lots of advantages. I mean, so outreach really kind of depends perhaps on addressing the client's kind of comfort issues at the start. I think meeting them on their own territory in the broadest sense, voluntary and a low profile for a low threshold for entry to a program rather than mandatory approach is clearly more successful. And has been displayed by all of our panelists, I think outreach can be delivered through many, many different approaches. So a kind of flexible, fluid and agile methodology appears to be a very sensible way of going forward. Very important to avoid negative stereotyping of people. And so when we engage with people, perhaps vulnerable, long way from the labour market, don't start to work with them with any kind of preconditions. And I think overall, migrants, young NEETs, women returning to the labour market, they're often inactive for one particular reason, and that is because support services have not been really designed to properly connect with them. So outreach is potentially the essential element in ensuring that we can engage with people and bring them back into the labour market kind of connection. So finally, perhaps strong branding, a strong atmosphere of trust. Funding and targets can be quite sensitive. We need to address those. A spirit of cooperation, and overall thinking about primarily what is going to kind of make the client engage with us, reflecting on why they haven't done so previously. So thank you very much for very interesting presentations and a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Eamon, for the excellent wrap up. So just the only thing that remains for me to do is to thank again to Eamon and to each of our panelists for joining us today. I can see from the chat that everyone's really appreciated it. So I think it's been a very successful webinar. We had lots of people, nearly 300 I saw joining us, which is a really great number for an event like this. So it shows the strong interest. Just to confirm, so people will get the recording and the presentation in the next few days to a week. So look out for that in your email. You'll receive that using the same email that you registered for the event at. So you will get a copy of that so you can look back at the examples and hear more. And other than that, just to say, keep looking out for future PES Network webinars on other topics. They'll be announced in the coming weeks and months. As Elodie said at the beginning, do keep checking the website, sign up to the newsletter if you haven't done already. And we look forward to seeing you at future PES Network events. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.